111. I'm just preparing my impromptu remarks. Winston Churchill. 11 to. Meeting Franklin Roosevelt was like opening your first bottle of champagne. Knowing him was like drinking it. Winston Churchill. 113. My wife and I tried 2 or 3 times in the last 40 years to have breakfast together, but it was so disagreeable we had to stop. Winston Churchill. 114. War is a game that is played with a smile. If you can't smile, grin. If you can't grin, keep out of the way till you can. Winston Churchill. 115. Healthy citizens are the greatest asset any country can have. Winston Churchill. 116. If you go on with this nuclear arms race, all you are going to do is make the rubble bounce. Winston Churchill. 117. I am certainly not one of those who need to be prodded. In fact, if anything, I am the prod. Winston Churchill. 118. I cannot pretend to be impartial about the colours. I rejoice with the brilliant ones and am genuinely sorry for the poor browns. Winston Churchill. 119. It is a fine thing to be honest, but it is also very important to be right. Winston Churchill. 120. The first quality that is needed is audacity. Winston Churchill. 1 to 1. The problems of victory are more agreeable than those of defeat, but they are no less difficult. Winston Churchill. 1 to 2. One does not leave a convivial party before closing time. Winston Churchill. 123. I always avoid prophesying beforehand, because it is a much better policy to prophesy after the event has already taken place. Winston Churchill. 124. The short words are best, and the old words are the best of all. Winston Churchill. 1 to 5. Politics is almost as exciting as war, and quite as dangerous. In war you can only be killed once, but in politics many times. Winston Churchill. 126. When I am abroad, I always make it a rule to criticize or attack the government of my own country. I make up for lost time when I come home. Winston Churchill. 127. I have never developed indigestion from eating my words. Winston Churchill. 1 to 8. Nothing can be more abhorrent to democracy than to imprison a person or keep him in prison because he is unpopular. This is really the test of civilization. Winston Churchill. 1 to 9. Although prepared for martyrdom, I prefer that it be postponed. Winston Churchill. 130. The power of man has grown in every sphere, except over himself. Winston Churchill. 131. India is a geographical term. It is no more a united nation than the equator. Winston Churchill. 132. If the Almighty were to rebuild the world and asked me for advice, I would have English channels round every country, and the atmosphere would be such that anything which attempted to fly would be set on fire. Winston Churchill. 133. It is always wise to look ahead, but difficult to look further than you can see. Winston Churchill. 134. No part of the education of a politician is more indispensable than the fighting of elections. Winston Churchill. 135. In those days, he was wiser than he is now. He used to frequently take my advice. Winston Churchill. 136. Although personally, I am quite content with existing explosives, I feel we must not stand in the path of improvement. Winston Churchill. 137. We do not covet anything from any nation except their respect. Winston Churchill. 138. The great defense against the air menace is to attack the enemy's aircraft as near as possible to their point of departure. Winston Churchill. 139. If it weren't for painting, I wouldn't live. I couldn't bear the extra strain of things. Winston Churchill. 140. We are asking the nations of Europe, between whom rivers of blood have flowed, to forget the feuds of 1,000 years. Winston Churchill. 141. It is a fine game to play, the game of politics, and it is well worth waiting for a good hand before really plunging. Winston Churchill. 140. The reserve of modern assertions is sometimes pushed to extremes. in which the fear of being contradicted leads the writer to strip himself of almost all sense and meaning. Winston Churchill. 143. No crime is so great as daring to excel. Winston Churchill. 144. Man will occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of the time he will pick himself up and continue on. Winston Churchill. 145. No idea is so outlandish that it should not be considered with a searching, but at the same time a steady eye. Winston Churchill. 145. No idea is so outlandish that it should not be considered with a searching, but at the same time a steady eye. Winston Churchill. 147. It is more agreeable to have the power to give than to receive. Winston Churchill. 148. War is mainly a catalogue of blunders. Winston Churchill. 149. Baldwin thought Europe was a bore, and Chamberlain thought it was only a greater Birmingham. Winston Churchill. 150. Do not let spacious plans for a new world divert your energies from saving what is left of the old. Winston Churchill. 151. When you are winning a war, almost everything that happens can be claimed to be right and wise. Winston Churchill. 152. I have been brought up and trained to have the utmost contempt for people who get drunk. Winston Churchill. 153. We occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of us pick ourselves up and hurry off as if nothing had happened. Winston Churchill. 154. For my part, I consider that it will be found much better by all parties to leave the past to history, especially as I propose to write that history myself. Winston Churchill. 155. A state of society where men may not speak their minds cannot long endure. Winston Churchill. 156. In war as in life, it is often necessary, when some cherished scheme has failed, to take up the best alternative open, and if so, it is folly not to work for it with all your might. Winston Churchill. 157. Really, I feel less keen about the army every day. I think the church would suit me better. Winston Churchill. 158. Politics is the ability to foretell what is going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year, and to have the ability afterwards to explain why it didn't happen. Winston Churchill. 159. We are stripped bare by the curse of plenty. Winston Churchill. 160. Broadly speaking, the short words are the best, and the old words best of all. Winston Churchill. 161. I always seem to get inspiration and renewed vitality by contact with this great novel land of yours, which sticks up out of the Atlantic. Winston Churchill. 160. The British nation is unique in this respect. They are the only people who like to be told how bad things are, who like to be told the worst. Winston Churchill. 163. I am never going to have anything more to do with politics or politicians. When this war is over, I shall confine myself entirely to writing and painting. Winston Churchill. 164. Short words are best, and the old words when short are best of all. Winston Churchill. 165. These are not dark days. These are great days, the greatest days our country has ever lived. Winston Churchill. 166. Politics are very much like war. We may even have to use poison gas at times. Winston Churchill.